Got it. Got it. No, no, that's incredibly helpful. And if you were to look at some of these specific things, right? Because I think a lot of folks also don't necessarily say have a background in finance, but
Yeah.
when you're running a business, you're operating, in some part of an organization, and you have various things that you are responsible for, accountable for. Any thoughts on what are some of these metrics, or like what are the common things that one needs to keep in mind from a skills perspective, while looking at integrating finance into the work that they do?
So I really don't think that you need to really overkill yourself and need to start learning finance in detail as operators, right? I don't think that should be the objective, because I think, and that is where you need an organization with heterogeneous skills, right? Like where different people bring different skills to the table. So you don't like, obviously you should understand the basics, and I think all of us understand the basics of finance, right? Which is math. And as I said, I do not expect operators to understand the nitty-gritties of GST, etc. I think what is important to understand is that, are you being objective about it? And that is where I feel that having a finance team that is actually integrated with the business is very,
Right.
very important right from the beginning, rather than trying to train your ops for people in finance. That is one. Second is making sure that ops and finance actually work in a congenial environment towards the same goal, rather than pushing or like being at conflict with each other, right? And I have actually seen all of these scenarios in my last 15 years of being in this field. I think, again, going so it's actually then becomes about organizational culture, in some ways. I know I'm digressing quite a bit from your question, but I think the answer to what you're saying is actually organizational culture, as to how do the various functions come together to solve a problem, rather than just look at it, okay, does the ops guy know this, right? And I can give you a very, very simple example over here,
Sure,
right?
sure.
Say, uh, and this is an example from my early days in Zovi. So here I can name the company because it was the company I worked in. There, somewhere, if the operators feel that they are getting value from finance and not pushback from finance, then they will work uh, more closely with finance, because they'll feel, you know what, I'm getting help from the finance function. I'm only not just getting pushback from the finance function. Whereas if they feel that, oh, the finance function is just creating problems, they're creating roadblocks, they're not letting me help, then they will automatically try to avoid the finance function. So that is where I feel getting the right people on, who are actually supportive of the business, who understand the business, who are able to add value, rather than people uh, who are just trying to show, "Oh, I'm a finance guy, I have the right to block bills, so I'll block bills." That approach kind of creates failure. But but yes, so I don't think operators need to learn finance in detail. Uh, but I think you need to create an environment in the organization where finance and ops work closely together, so
Sure.
that both are working off the same set of data and they trust each other to get to the right financial outcomes.
Understood. And any examples from your experience, right, where looking at finance as sort of like a growth engine, and not just as, say, a supporting or a reporting function, where this kind of like good operational and financial alignment sort of led to something positive, right? Whether it was performance, scale, any examples from your experience?
Uh, the one example I can think of, Rohit, is there was one company where I was working closely with, where we were trying to figure out how do you align management incentives or team incentives with the financial outcomes, and like what is the right way to design financial incentives for the team. And I think that was one very good example where I saw finance, sales, and the top management coming together to actually design, how do you make sure that people are incentivized for the same or the right objective. So just to give an example, in what happened in this specific case was that sales incentive was designed purely on the basis of sales. Now, this
Right.
sales it was B2B sales. So we all know that B2B sales can easily be pumped up by reducing margins or by increasing working capital cycles and so on and so forth, where the outcome you'll get to know only after a long time. So here, rather than measuring GMV into gross margin, we actually moved to measuring total gross margin into ROE as the
Okay.
two
Okay.
metrics. But then these became more complex to measure. It's easier to measure GMV, easier to measure gross margin. But then once you start measuring ROEs, etc., it becomes more complex to measure those kind of metrics. But then with the help of the finance function, we actually integrated how do you measure transaction by transaction, the ROEs of those businesses, link it to the salespeople, and then uh, build their incentives aligned with the broader objective of the firm. So I think that is where it becomes critical, that what is the firm's strategic goals? How do you measure the firm's strategic goals? And then backward integrate that entire thing down to the last level, right? Then everyone is moving in the right direction. People are not pulling the firm in different directions. So I think in that kind of alignment, what is also important is that things are measured properly, things are reported properly, and there's a sense of transparency in the organization. And that's the role finance can really play, to make sure that data is correct, it is objective, it is timely, it is communicated transparently,
Sure.
and then the organization is moving in the right direction, and and the incentives are aligned. So that's an example like that came to my mind, where actually finance could play a key role in being a growth engine, and also identifying the metrics that should be there for measurement of team success.
Got it. Understood. No, look, I think that's also a great segue into sort of maybe the more technical part of the conversation, which is to also understand, how does a finance function operate? What is financial planning? What is cash flow management? How do some of these things look like, right?
Yeah.
Maybe what I'll do is ask you a little bit of an open-ended question at the top, right? Which is to first sort of understand, we've spoken about a bunch of these things, but when you have a good finance function or you have a good financial capability within your company, right?
Yep.
What does that look like, right? Fundamentally. And second, if you could touch upon, since you've, looked at very early stage companies at Aspada, more growth stage companies at Lightrock, you started your career at a very large company like ITC before switching to a startup. How does this role that finance plays in the company, that people have to have towards finance, as an expertise or a capability within the organization, how does this also change as you go to businesses of different scale?
Sure. So I actually have a full framework around this, so happy to share at some point of time my thoughts on that framework. But the way I say is that there are 5 or 6 functions that finance should be good at, or finance as a team. Or when I say what is the CFO really leading, what are the functions that the CFO is really leading? I think primarily it is you have to get the basics right. So the quality of financial accounting and operations, which is just pure day-to-day boring work of recording all the transactions, making sure that everything got recorded properly, everything got payments are made properly, all of those things, just the basic day to day. That might seem very boring and very, very basic, but that is the foundation on which the whole thing is built. Because if that piece is wrong, then your entire foundation is wrong. Whatever you're building on top of that is extremely flimsy, extremely fragile. So that is actually where everything starts. That how strong is your financial accounting and operations, the basics just in place. I think the objectives that we're looking for, what do you get if that function is right? You get a single version of truth. And I think the biggest issue that I've faced within organizations, why decision making goes wrong, is because people are not working out of a single version of truth. And the reason why they're not working out of a single version of truth is because the finance function is not doing a good enough job of providing that single version of truth to the organization. So that is primary. Because of the marketing, and if, like, so I'll give you a very live example on this. Is in one of the companies I was working with, the marketing team was basically measuring its marketing cost on the basis of the clicks, etc., that they think they were generating. And what is the cost per click? And let's say your cost per month, they estimated at 45 lakhs per month.
Okay.
Now, when the final invoice came, that final invoice was say 60 lakhs for that month. The reason is that for whatever reason, there was a disconnect between the data of the service provider and the data that was internally being generated by the company. Now, it's obviously important to reconcile that to see whether the company was right or whether the service provider was right. But then the basic assumption of the marketing cost was off by 20%. Now, if there had been a single version of truth that was there across the organization, the finance is providing the data that way, like 60 lakhs is the cost, 45 lakhs is not the cost, then decisions could have been made better, right?
Right.
So just that thing is very, very important. And why does finance fail to provide the single version of truth? Processes are weak, You don't account things on time. Information flow is weak. Uh, you're leaving too many things for the end. I think those are the kind of things that actually uh, weaken the systems. So I think very, very important that you fix this first. It's boring but important.
Got it. Got it.
Once once your single version of truth is there, and once your quality of data is good, then you can do a lot of things with that data. And there I think the role of business finance then comes into play, and your commercial controls come into play. That is where you can build your dashboards, that is when you can build your analytical tools, and you can start providing insights and opportunities to the management, that you know what, by doing this, like, let's say there's two cities, right? You're operating in, let's say, Bangalore and Hyderabad. Bangalore's gross margins are 18%, Hyderabad are 12%. Why is that 18 and 12 difference there? Where is that difference coming from? Which is that cost head which is contributing to the difference in between Bangalore and Hyderabad? How can you fix that? So those kind of insights, opportunities, just at a very, very basic level, can start getting identified if your basic data is right, and then you build your analytical tools on top of those financial tools. Also areas like how can you expand margin, and I think most importantly, early warning signals, right? Like if things are going wrong, identify them sooner rather than later. And that is what happens if your data is live and you are working across a single version of truth across the organization. You I think the role of business finance, as I put very simply, is make good things happen and stop bad things from happening, right? So once your data is right and you can build the right analytical tools on top of that, uh, you can actually make good things happen and stop bad things from happening. What this analytics leads to as the next stage is actually very strong treasury and cash controls, because now you know which part of the what is the role of the CFO at the end of the day? The role of the CFO is basically capital allocation, to make
Right.
sure that the important or the more profitable parts of the business get more access to the cash than the less promising
Yes.
or the less profitable ones, right? Once your data is right, once you know where things are happening, right? So let's say in the same example, if Hyderabad is delivering 12% margin and Bangalore is delivering 18% margin, not going into other reasons why you should pump more money in Hyderabad, but just knowing that you'll ensure that, okay, like when there is a scarcity or when there's an opportunity cost of capital available, the capital should go to the more profitable part of the business or more strategic part of the business. So I think just making sure that the right allocation of resources is happening towards the right sides of the business, the stronger parts of the business, stronger working capital management, which is to make sure that, okay, I am making sure that my working capital is right. Uh, how much debt do I need to raise? How much equity should I raise? How should I maximize ROE? I think those treasury and cash controls, right, which is the core function of finance, actually gets triggered once your first two functions were in place.
Right.
Uh, I would say that these three becomes the more technical part. Then the other parts happens like compliance, regulation, legal. I think needs to be extremely strong. We are in a very complex tax environment. As I was saying, like taxes could actually be the make or break of business in certain cases. If you get your GST wrong, if you get your reverse charge wrong, like there's so many nuances, right? Like which operators I don't even expect them to know, and that is where it's
Hmm.
important that operators and finance work closely together to make sure that those blind sites are covered and you don't realize some mistakes way down the line. I think is very, very important. Also, just from risk management perspective, right? If you get something wrong on the compliance or legal side, all the good work that you have done could actually go down the drain, and you could just be spending all the top management time in like going and visiting government authorities and courts. So you don't really want that to happen. uh, Outside of that, I would say that where the CFO's role comes into play, not so much of finance, but is around strategic matters like new products, mergers, acquisitions, integrations. Those are the areas where I think finance has to. But this is at a, like I was saying, like this is not so critical at the earlier stages of the business, more growth stages of the business, like once you've got to a certain stage. And that is why you really need that finance guy who has the weight, or the senior finance guy, right? The CFO who can actually question the CEO and say, you know what, this is what the view is, this is what can go wrong. So in every critical decision, that I would say uh, the challenge or the positive challenge that they can provide becomes very, very critical. And governance, of course, is extremely important, where you say that, okay, like you're running your board meetings properly, you're doing your audits properly, you're running your internal audits properly, you're doing your risk management properly, stakeholder management. I think those are the other things that come into play.